Hi guys, we are moving forward with our conversation on supply and demand. We're getting into the supply side of things today. Um, just showing you where you're at in your notes here. Remember, we started these back with the demand, and your paper is going to look something like this. We're halfway down the front side. Okay, so we're on the definition of supplies where we're going to start. The demand's up there, and we're going to go down to eventually the supply shifters. Okay, so we're going to get through these. One thing I will mention is that the supply side is a little bit trickier to understand than the demand side. We're used to being demanders. All right. We're not necessarily in a spot where we're supplying a whole lot of stuff right now. We don't have as much experience at at doing that. So maybe try to think about like a garage sale you might have had, your parents had, or maybe you participated in it as we kind of go through these and try to think about how you would think in those types of situations. Um, Another way to think about it is if you're familiar with the stock market, if you would sell a stock at a certain price. Okay, as we kind of go through this. So anyway, let's get this definition out of the way. There are some similarities to the demand side. That similarity being that we've got to be willing and able to supply something. Okay, so when we talk about the supply, we're talking about producing it and selling it. Okay, and to do that, there's got to be the willingness and ability to do it has to be present. Okay, so um, I'll give you a couple examples. So for if you've ever seen the TV show Gold Rush, you've seen those guys get a whole lot of gold out of the ground, and they use these super huge machines. And getting gold out of the ground is not as easy as you might think. So they have to put a ton of dirt in this machine, and it washes it out. And the machines cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Okay, now the trade-off is the good thing is that an ounce of gold, which is about that big, is worth about $2,000 right now. So there is potential for some major profit. But the one thing that we also have to understand is that not only is it the price that's important, we've got to be able to make a potential profit. So if I buy a $100,000 machine and I have to pay for thousands of dollars of fuel and I don't get any gold out of the ground, or I just get a small amount of gold out of the ground, it's not going to do me any good. Okay, so I kind of add this profit aspect to the price part of the definition. Okay, so I've got to be able to make a profit based on whatever price things are being sold at to be willing to produce it. Okay, on the flip side, having the ability to produce something. So I have the ability, like I could go into my backyard, dig a hole, and try to sell that dirt on the side of the street. Same general concept. Can I sell that dirt for a profit? The costs of doing that are extremely low, okay, as far as I don't need a huge machine. However, the price of dirt, I would not be able to make any profit. So you've got to have both of those things present to be able to try to supply something. Willingness comes from availability of capital. We've talked about those factors of production. Do I have the skills to operate the machinery, for example, in the gold rush example? Um, and do I have those natural resources available as well, which I don't have any land that has gold in it, at least that I know of. Okay, so we've got to have that willingness and ability. Now, here's what we also know, all right, that as the price goes up or as potential profit increases, all right, our willingness and ability to supply that product, when I say our, I'm talking about society, the market, okay, to supply that product will increase. Okay, so the more money people can make, the more people are going to try to produce that product and make a profit. Okay, so some pretty obvious stuff there. Nothing that's reinventing the wheel. The way that the supply and demand curves interact with each other is going to be what you eventually need to understand as we're moving into the future here. All right, so let's graph this supply curve. Again, there's some hopefully some comfort in the consistencies of what the supply and demand graphs are going to look like. So the supply graph has the same axes, okay, price and quantity. All right, and we said that as the price of something increases, more people are going to want to supply it. Our quantity is going to increase. However, when the price of something, if I can't sell anything for a profit, I'm going to start out way down at the bottom. So our supply curve is going to have this upward slope. Okay, so And again, that's the concept that you want to understand, is that our supply curve is going to have this upward slope. Remember, our demand curve goes this way. All right. Um, if you're referencing what you would have looked at in a previous video. So our supply curve is always going to have this upward slope. Now, we can change the slope of the supply. Again, there's some things that go into it. The nice thing is if you're familiar with the demand inelastic, right? Vertical means inelastic, horizontal is elastic. Remember, inelastic has, the more vertical it is, the more it looks like an eye, which kind of that's how I get my buzzword for remembering what the graph looks like. But really what it means is that as I supply something, I have to either sell it really fast, or I don't really get to pick whether or not I want to sell it. Okay. If I have to sell it and get rid of it, that's going to be inelastic supply. Elastic supply is going to be the case where I can choose to hold on to it and not sell it for something because of certain factors we'll get to here in a second. Okay, so those factors are, am I able to increase or decrease production as that price increases, okay, or decreases? If the price increases, can I speed up production? Okay, am I able to do that? And those inputs, whether it's labor, can I hire more people really fast? Or can I get people to work longer, or get my machines to work longer? Do I have access to the natural resources? Am I able to move those resources around if I need to, the mobility of it? And probably the easiest one to understand is, can I hold on to it if no one wants to buy it and sell it later? So, like, for example, if I'm selling bananas, bananas are extremely elastic. I can't choose. I'm sorry, bananas are inelastic. I can't choose when to sell bananas, right? They're going to spoil fast. They're going to spoil quickly. I've got to sell them as fast as possible. If no one's willing to pay the price, well, looking at our graph here, if no one's willing to pay a high price, well, I still have to sell basically the same amount, right? I can't decide to hold on to those bananas. Whereas if I'm selling toothpaste, right, toothpaste doesn't spoil. So if the price of toothpaste were to fluctuate, right, and go way down, I could decrease how much I was trying to sell. Not too much topic of conversation about on the test about the law of supply. We're not going to, or I'm sorry, the elasticity of supply. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but I did want to touch base on it since we talked about elasticity of demand. Okay. Just like with demand, if we don't have a shifter and just the price changes, we're going to shift along, or we're going to slide along this line. Okay, price goes up, we increase our quantity supplied. Not shifting the line is going to make a little bit more sense after our next video, when we talk about what's going to be referred to as equilibrium. Okay, so there are some things that cause our supply curve to shift. We're going to identify those before we start moving it around and saying why we're going to do that. I've got my price and quantity here. I've got my supply curve there. Okay. And with the demand, we talked about a little abbreviation help called ERDL. And if you remember, just like with demand, supplies abbreviation is going to stand for increase, right? Decrease left. Okay. So if we're going to increase our supply, and this is where things get a little bit tricky, is because our brain plays tricks on us. We're going to shift our supply to the right. Okay, I'm going to call this S1. All right, that's our increase. All right, and then if we're going to decrease our supply, we're going to shift it to the left. And again, it kind of plays a trick on your brain, right? I'm just going to call this S2. All right, because it looks like it's going upwards, right? So we got to kind of keep that straight. I've made that mistake several different times as I'm trying to take a test, and it's a high stakes situation where, okay, I think increase in supply, it's going to move upwards, right? And I get backwards. Try to use this, and it's going to play a role in, you're going to be able to use it throughout the entirety of the semester, okay? There's some other concepts that use the same exact abbreviation. So it's going to be beneficial for you to understand, okay, and remember. Alrighty, so that's what our shifts are going to look like. Again, what this is eventually showing us is it's trying to show us that, okay, if we have a set price of something that's set by the market, right? That at this particular supply, this is how much we'd be willing to supply, right? If we, for whatever reason, and you'll see some of these shifters here in a second, maybe one of those shifters would be an increase in the number of producers, right? So now we've got more suppliers of a product. It's going to increase how much is available. That's pretty obvious. Maybe a company closes and we decrease how many companies are producing stuff, and that leaves us with less stuff. Okay, so that's all that's showing us. That's all that we're trying to predict when we try to shift this supply line one way or the other. We're going to keep that in mind with potential profit, okay, and say, okay, well, if companies think they can make a bigger profit or more money, we're going to shift to the right, okay, due to the cost of inputs we'll get to in a second, or if they're going to make less money, they're going to decrease their supply. All right, so the first one, and we're on that chart on the back side of those notes, okay, is that if we change the price of production, okay, so again, that's going to cut into our profit if it increases, okay, the price of our production. So what are some things that can cause an increase in the price of production? Well, if we raise minimum wage, right, think about what goes into the factors of production to produce stuff. Okay, we've got the land, that's the natural resources. That the price of those things can be affected for any number of different ways. We'll get to some here in a second. We've got, labor resources. Do people want higher wages? I mentioned a minimum wage. Okay, and then you've got the capital resources. That's the tools that we have to buy. A bunch of different things can cause the price of that thing to go up. Probably most notably like fuel. Okay, so if the price of fuel goes up, we're going to decrease our supply. If the price of fuel goes down, we might increase our supply. Okay, so there's any number of different inputs, and a lot of times it's going to be tied into, these shifters are going to be tied into some type of input. Okay, what goes into producing stuff. We can change the number of producers. Okay, increase in producers, we increase our supply. Okay, so increase, we shift to the right, decrease, we shift to the left. Pretty straightforward. We already mentioned that one. Natural disasters are going to cause some type of a shortage of a natural resource, probably, right? And so whether that be an input of, if I'm making spaghetti sauce and we have a natural disaster that destroys tomato farms, well, that's going to make tomatoes be more expensive. And so now I'm going to decrease my supply of tomato sauce because the inputs of that production are more expensive. Technology is going to make things more efficient. Okay, so if we increase our technology, again, it's going to make something cheaper, whether that be a labor resource. Maybe I can build a robot instead of hire a worker, right? Maybe I can, farming has a lot of probably somewhat unknown changes in technology where a corn stalk grows way more ears of corn today than it did 100 years ago, right? So I'm using the same amount of land. My land resource stays the same. However, with that one small piece of land, I can grow more food, right? One way to refer to that is yield. Okay, so my land yields more product than before because technology has created new breeds of corn that grow faster and bigger. And so those changes in technology are going to increase our supply. Number 5 is the trickiest one because we are used to being demanders. Now, with number 5, and if you remember on the demand side, we had one of the shifters as a change in consumer expectations. We also have changes in producer expectations. And so the way to kind of think about this is to imagine that you own some stock. Okay, so keep in mind in the stock market, when you own stock and you want to get rid of it, you're selling it to someone else. You're the producer of that small portion of stock, right? Now, the stock market prices are set by people's demand and obviously how many people want to sell it. Okay, and if you heard or knew that the price of your stock was going to go down tomorrow, okay, you're going to work hard to get rid of it today, okay? Because I want to sell it for that higher price. You would increase your supply today. Now, on the flip side, if you heard that the price of your stock was going to go up tomorrow, okay, be more valuable tomorrow, well, you're not going to sell it today, okay? So what are you going to do today if you know the price of your stock is going to increase tomorrow? You're going to decrease your supply today. Now, the information's got to be exclusive, meaning that only the producer can know or only the consumer can know. Okay, so those situations will be presented to you clearly in test situations. But that number, this change in producer expectations is the tricky one because we don't have tons of experience with being the producer of something. The last one you just got to memorize, okay, is that the government can cause a shift in the supply curve. If they want to tax a product, it's going to decrease our supply, and if they want to provide a subsidy, they're going to increase our supply. Okay, and that's going to be our prediction. So remember, decrease left, increase to the right, just to kind of keep you guys hearing that, so it kind of gets ingrained into your brain a little bit. Okay, after we do some of these practice problems, it's going to make a whole lot more sense. You want to make sure that you're keeping these in front of your face, and remember that if we don't find a shifter, we're not going to shift our line. Okay, so those are kind of the tricky things. We got to get good at these. It takes quite a bit of practice. You'll have that obviously linked for your work today before we get too much further. Okay. Our next step is to get these curves on the same graph together. Okay. All right. We will talk soon.